All right, good. So I'm going to introduce our next set of speakers. So this is today's second power couple that we're going to introduce, the Normans, Jane and Cliff. So I'm going to read a little bit about what they've accomplished, not everything, because it's a really long list. Yeah. So Jane is currently president of the Profound Knowledge Products, Inc., PKP, Inc.com, right?
Yeah.
Yep. There's a lot of really good information on their website. One of the great ones for people that are learning is their reading list. So go to PKP Inc., that's INC.com, and check out their reading list. It's an incredible source of resources. So thank you for putting that together. Jane has been an executive with Caterpillar, ConAgra, the Conrad Company. She's consulted with leaders in manufacturing, food distribution, technology, software, health industries across 12 different countries. She met Cliff when she wrote a paper, and Cliff responded to that paper, and they corresponded for 3 years before they actually met. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They've also been co-authors of the book Transforming Healthcare Leadership. I met Cliff for the first time when he was working with API, apparently fairly early in your API career.
Yes.
Right? He had come over from Phil Crosby.
We were much younger then.
Yeah, we were much younger. Better looking, too. Yeah. So he had come over from Crosby Associates, where Deming referred to him as one of the SPC unwashed, I think was what it was.
Lloyd.
Lloyd passed that along, yeah. But I have to say, one of the things that Cliff has helped do with quality as a business strategy and API is actually provide, here's some how-to around the theories that we learned from Dr. Deming. I remember in a seminar, an executive standing up and saying, okay, you've taught me a lot of great theories. How do I do this? And Deming's response was very helpful. He says, you want me to do your job? Of course, he sat down and said, no, thanks, I'm good. No, so what happened is Cliff and API have been helping us figure out how do we implement some of this stuff. So, and you're doing the accelerated model for improvement as well as part of your work. So there's a wealth of practical experience and knowledge that Jane and Cliff have, and I hope we get to enjoy some of that today. So thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you so much. Thank you. First off, Jane and I really too, I feel honored and privileged to be here with you. As I look out over the group, there are some old friends, some people that we've known for a number of years, and I'm just so excited to see the number of new faces and the folks that are just getting started in their careers. So we're excited to be here, to say the least. Jane and I talked about going over this presentation, and we have 4 parts here. We're going to talk about our personal journey, some methods and approaches to actually doing something about the Deming philosophy and ideas, kind of what we've learned in the last 30 years, and then applications for what we call a system for learning. So we'll be talking through that. So we discussed, well, you do the first 2 parts and I'll do the second 2 parts, and we did all that. So what we've opted for here is hopefully there'll be an outbreak of cooperation that you're going to see up here, although it could turn into a Punch and Judy show. So those of you who know us know that that's possible. So we'll start out here with our learning journey and kind of where we came from. And you'll see a bunch of pictures up here. And both Jane and I were introduced to Dr. Deming very early, myself in 1982 in February. And I was working at this place called Halliburton, which is actually Otis Engineering. And I was just starting in the quality improvement area. And every place I've ever worked in, whether it's McDonnell Douglas, Norris Industries, Halliburton, wherever it is, you walk in the front door, and then there's a litany of reasons as to why we're different than everybody else. I mean, that's the first thing you get is that enculturation. So when I was working at McDonnell Douglas, they told me, we're not like Boeing. All those planes out there are different. I said, I know that. I said, no, Cliff, I mean, they're really different. Like, those have the restrooms in front. That one has them in the middle. I said, wow, And any time I hear that, I know it's just not long before they're purchased. And it took McDonnell Douglas actually a long time to be purchased by Boeing, but eventually they were, the different company. So there's a lesson in there. Jane and I, over the years, we've noticed that every company we've ever worked with sees themselves as unique and different. And right now we're working on missiles. We're working on elevator interiors. We're working in healthcare. We're working in tech, a number of different industries. And what we've learned is they're all basically the same, but they call all their problems by different names, but all the problems are very, very similar. So it's very interesting. So there's some other folks up there that you may or may not know. You heard Eric talk about Philip Crosby. There's a little bit of a story there. When I was introduced to Deming the first time was in that February of '82 time frame, and I was at Crystal City Hotel, the Sheraton there in Washington, D.C., actually Arlington. And my boss had sent me up there, a guy named Purvis Thrash that worked at Otis Engineering. That's where I was within Halliburton. And he said, Cliff, go see this Deming guy. You were excited about the video the other day on NBC, so you go see him. And take the production manager with you, so it's quality, so it's got to be about production manager and Cliff, right? So we go see Dr. Deming. I get down early, get my badge and all that, and I go back up to my room because I've forgotten something. And when I'm coming back down the elevator, Dr. Deming gets on, and he has two ladies that are kind of holding him up. One of those was probably Nancy Mann. I don't know who the other lady was. And Dr. Deming saw my George Washington badge where I'd checked in. And he looked across the elevator at me, and he walked over to me, picked my badge up, and he looked at it, read the name, and then he backed up, braced himself against the elevator, and he says, Mr. Norman, what I'm going to tell you in the next 4 days will haunt you for the rest of your life. And I thought, I'm 29 years old. I've just been certified by ASQ as a quality engineer. I mean, there's nothing I don't know about quality. And I'm thinking, this guy ought to be dead. He shouldn't be haunting me, And then he says this, and I'm saying this to the young folks in the room because this is the best bit of advice I got from him. Right after that, he said, and by the way, if you're working for people and you're not learning from them, you ought to think about getting a different job. I thought, oh, my God. And at that time, I was working with a guy, and he didn't fit that. So when I went back, I actually went up to the VP of Engineering, a guy named J.T. Rourke. I said, do you mind if I come to work for you? And he asked me why I'm having this issue. I told him, he just laughed. He said, yeah, I'll put in the transfer Monday. And I thought, wow, this is great.
It works.
You don't have to be a prisoner. You can just ask, and they'll move you, So the other individual up there is Crosby, and the way Crosby happened is the guy who hired me at Halliburton went to work for Philip Crosby. He was a vice president there. So he called me up about 1986, and he asked me to come down to Crosby to help with statistical thinking and all the rest of it. And he said, Cliff, I want you to do me a favor. I know how passionate you are about those old guys, talking about Duran and Deming. He said, but you have to promise me you'll shut up for 6 months. Now, some of you know me like Ian. That's all next to impossible, and I did. I didn't say a word. And we had this guy come in, and he was looking at us all as consultants, and he was getting our hair coiffed and suits and all this kind of stuff. And they sent feedback on me that I was much too introverted to be a consultant. I walked up and I handed that to Ken. I said, are you happy now? And he said, yeah, now you can do what you need to do. So before I went down there, Lloyd Provost, who's my mentor and Jane's mentor, he had been working with us for about 5 or 6 years, and he wrote a letter to Dr. Deming, and he said, Cliff Norman's going down to Winter Park, Florida, to help him with statistical methods and some other things, problem solving. And Dr. Deming wrote back to Lloyd, and he said, here's wishing Mr. Norman his great success on bringing statistical thinking to the great unwashed. That's one of my prize letters in my thing. So with that, Jane?
So Cliff came through a similar background. I graduated from college and I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, see, and I still don't. I had engineering and a natural science degree and teaching and a voice major. And, you can go to Juilliard, or you can stay here and you just met the first guy who became your husband, and I guess I'll stay here and I'm not going to do the other stuff. So I went to work at Caterpillar because somebody came up and said, hey, jobs are really hard in '74, and do you mind working? Do you mind hard work? I said, well, no, I've always been the tomboy, kind of do stuff. They said, well, why don't you get into the apprenticeship? This is the first time they've opened up the apprenticeship, the machinist apprenticeship to women. I said, well, I'll try that, you know. So I went there and I interviewed and I started the next Monday. Pretty quick. Well, the pictures they gave you weren't what it was, because I thought they were these little things like at Sears, and they're as big as they could be. But that experience was a foundation that helped me through so much of my career. And so that tractor you see over there is my tractor. I had nine jobs in 12 years, 7 of which I was the first woman to have it corporate-wide, worldwide, and 2 of the first in our division. And that's a hydrostatic tractor, first one that they ever did. And the people that are on there, I came through the window of Duran originally, but because we were in Iowa, Deming used to come, and I also was a CQE. And because of that, we became a Deming camp. And the rest of Caterpillar they didn't like Deming, because Deming said, management, it's your problem. They didn't like hearing that. And we said, we're okay, we'll handle that. And the introduction to Schuhart was so important. And the other people, and Mary Parker Follett is the woman up there. If you haven't read anything of Mary Parker Follett, we'll refer to it once, and she's a wonderful person. Akoff, and the man that has the writing behind him is Dr. Maccabee, who is, in the last 5 years of Deming's life, he spent dinners every week with Dr. Maccabee and Akoff. And one of the things that Maccabee told us is every time they had dinner, Deming would take out his little pad and he'd write notes. He was always learning. And so one thing that I learned from Dr. Deming is that if you really are a learner, you never call yourself an expert. You have expertise, but you're never an expert. But you are an apprentice, which means that you are continuing to learn. So as I've looked at that over the years, even when I've helped other people, I've told them, now you're an apprentice, and your job is to share what you know with others and learn more, and then come back and share more with us. So
in that first, when Jane said that, it made me remember at the first Deming seminar I went to in '82, first thing he got up and he said, you know, every morning I wake up and I'm astounded by my own ignorance. And I thought, wow, I traveled all this way, and I was hoping I was going to get some silver bullets I could take home, you know. So that was to put us all in our place and let us know there's a long time to learn here. So this is a logo that we've created that shows the system of profound knowledge. Those 4 elements up there are well known to all of you by now. IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, calls those 4 things as they come together the science of improvement. And so there are some places that actually require that. As we looked at the 4 parts of profound knowledge, and as all of us would come out of Deming seminars and we'd hear our clients say, well, he's given us the theory, but we really don't have a method. And you heard Eric's retort to that. Deming used to say, if I have to give you the method, then you should send me your check. You know, I've given you the theory. What else do you want me to do here? So the model for improvement that's in the middle, which has the 3 basic questions of what we're trying to accomplish, how we're going to know that a change is an improvement, and what changes do we need to make. And in the PDSA cycle under it, kind of the engine for learning, and we'll talk more about that, was actually developed with those 4 streams of theory in mind. So how can we actually get people to actualize the system of profound knowledge? Now, that doesn't mean because you're using the model for improvement that you'll understand the system of profound knowledge, but what it does mean is if you have a good working knowledge of the system of profound knowledge, that you'll use the method of the model for improvement in a better way. So, the other thing that's, and I had this question that actually became the answer. I was working with a group, I think it was Hewlett-Packard. For those of you who may or may not know the 14 points that you have in your book there, the first 10 of those was written by HP in the early 80s. And so Dr. Deming was up talking, and several people have said it today, and everybody said, what's he saying? Well, those engineers and leadership at Hewlett-Packard, they said, you know, we've got to get this laid out. So they started putting the points down, and at the end of their session with Dr. Deming, they said, does this sound about right, about what you're saying? So Ron Moen has the original 10 that came out of that HP seminar, and then, of course, they've added 4 more to it. And I started at HP, I called up Brian Joyner. I said, you know, Brian, you and several other people have been at Hewlett-Packard. So what did you do and what happened after that? And Brian gave me a real interesting idea. He said, you know, Cliff, it takes one kind of brains to start something, and it takes another kind of brains to sustain it. Wow. That was some really good information there. But as I started working with the HP folks, one of them looked at me one day and he said, Cliff, you know, this all seems like common sense. Why aren't everybody doing what Dr. Deming said to do? I said, that's a real good question. I said, let's think about that as we go along here. So throughout the 2-day workshop I was doing with them, every time I'd finish a topic, whether it's variation or systems thinking or whatever it was, this guy would pop up and he would say, you know, Cliff, this is hard. You know, by the end of the 2 days, I thought, I think we've answered your question. This is hard. So if you look at the left-hand side, and these are very traditional things that all of us have been exposed to at one time or another. And if you look at that right-hand side, there's something earth-shattering going on over there. See, I can tell if one number's higher than another. That doesn't take a lot of brains to do that. But to actually learn about the theory of variation, that means I've got to go do something. I've got to change. You know, if you start looking at each one of these, understanding a system, that means I've actually got to spend time and convert looking at the org chart, the player roster, and start putting together a playbook for my folks. Today there's a bunch of college football going on. And if the coach shows up with just a player roster, he's probably in trouble. Every coach is expected to show up with a player roster and a playbook, but not in business. You can just show up with a playbook or player roster just fine, you know. You go over there, there's like real work going on over here. As David Langford just talked about, the attribution error is alive and well. We've got the blame flame. It's actually built into our language. When Jane and I were in Mexico, we educated all our children, and they all learned Spanish. Well, Jane and I had not learned Spanish. Both of us studied French. Jane had a good reason. She was in St. Louis, but I was raised in Los Angeles, California, and you chose to speak French. That shows a special problem, you know. So my daughter says, Dad, you need to go invest yourself and spend a month down in Mexico. And so we went down there and we were going through this verb conjugation and all that, which in Spanish is very difficult. And my daughter told me, she said, Dad, you're really going to be interested in this piece of it, because in Spanish, you know, as you look at things, like if you walk out the door and catch your door on the shirt or catch your shirt on the door, you know, if I see you do that, I'll say, Dad caught his shirt on the door, or you'll say, I caught my shirt on the door. But in Spanish, that translates to the door caught the shirt. So in that language, the system's going to dominate, but not in English. We're like this all the time. So you don't have a chance. The blame flame is definitely going to take off here. So if you look down here, judgment, you know, are we hitting some target? Pretty easy to do, pretty natural. But over here, actually helping people do a better job, that's a little bit different issue. And if I start looking at all those on the right-hand side, that means the leader has to change. The stuff on the left-hand side requires no change in the management. And when I was talking to Ron Moen when I was down at Crosby, he said, Cliff, you know what's great about the Crosby message? I said, no. He said, if you look at the 4 absolutes of quality management, it requires no change on the management's part. You know, conformance to requirements. Do it right the first time. Add up the cost of doing poor quality and show it to people regularly. And oh, by the way, do prevention. There you go. So those kind of things really sell. You know, go out and solve a project here. Take care of that project for me, and I'll give you a colored belt. Requires no change on my part. I don't have to do anything at this point. Okay? Nice and sweet, easy to do. Okay?
So what Cliff is talking about, and I think all of you are going through this as well, you learn new things. Some people here are talking about new things. We're relearning things that we knew, and it's kind of reminding us, and we hadn't thought about them in a while. It's making them think of differently, and it's kind of, it's not that, I remember when you were talking about reading the book several times, Tim, we have a friend who went to 7 Deming seminars, and they said, why'd you go to 7 Deming seminars? He says, well, he wasn't different. He said, but I was every time. I was different every time, and I call it like we're like a candle, and we're dipped in the paraffin, and then we go back into the system, and it beats all the wax off. If we get dipped enough, pretty soon we're big enough that we can handle a little bit of beating around because we're still a good candle. So, you know, just because you come back more than once, that's a good thing. Don't feel bad about that. So, but the thing that's the hardest is the unlearning. See, that's what Deming was doing. He was telling you that what you've been doing or what you've been taught is not right. I tell people, you got to take that little button in the back of your head and turn off the right button. Schools do that. I have to be right on the answer of the test, and I've been conditioned. People in different businesses are conditioned to do certain things. So the unlearning is the hardest thing. So what I'm going to say to you is we're going to probably present some things that may cause some unlearning. And that causes dissonance. You may have to think about it for a while. So we don't expect you all to love us, but we do have some different methods and tools that we've been using that actually have helped us and a lot. And one of those is a thing we call AMY. AMY's your friend. Accelerated Model for Improvement. If you look across the top are the 3 questions from the Model for Improvement. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we know the change is an improvement? And what changes can you make? Now, you were talking about De Bono too. I love De Bono. This particular tool actually is built like a De Bono fan right here, because these are the eyes, the change concepts that come out of the improvement guide. Thank you, Cliff. Mental things, where I'm getting old. We have a clear, distinct project definition. It's fundamental change, so what's going to be designed or redesigned? API said that either you design a new product, process, or service in order to get some outcome, you redesign an existing product, process, or service, you improve the system as a whole, which means world hunger, or you take a known solution and you try to use that and modify that to work, which means now I have to say, do I have it already? Then I'm back to redesigning. If I don't have it, then I'm into designing. So the format that we use is either you're going to design or redesign what product, process, or service in order to get what income. One sentence. I can't tell you how many times I've read 29-page projects or charters that only told me what the problem was and never told me what they were going to do, and they hadn't really thought about what it contributed. So we'll show you how we actually map to get that as well. We also have a core team. We don't enjoy social loafing. Social loafing, have you heard of that before? I bet you've experienced it. 10 or 15 people on a committee or a team, sometimes 20 or 25. Education is really bad for that. I come from a family of educators. Who does all the work? The vital few is the Pareto principle, right? That's what we call the core team. 3 to 5 people is what we have, 3 to 5 people. All the other people who have knowledge and need to be involved, we call them ad hoc people. We bring them in when we need them and we take them out. So they don't come to every meeting. Decision making is much quicker with 3 people. Developing and testing changes is much quicker. The part that I'd also like to show you is up here. You'll see under how will we know a change is improvement? We have 3 types of measures because we use system thinking. One is the outcome that we want. 2 or 3 more. The others are process measures. And your final one is what we call a balancing measure. Balancing measure says if I squeeze a balloon, where am I going to cause havoc? Someplace else in the system? That's one part. The other balancing measure that I always ask our clients to have and our teams to have is the staff satisfaction. If they don't like it, it's not easy to do. If it's not easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing, they won't do it.
So you better tell them right now that there's no numerical goals up here.
Oh, that's right. I meant to say that. We don't put numerical goals. It causes people to stop. But we do give them a time frame. We have work that we do with the leadership to define the draft project, which is the first 2 columns. The team actually fills out the last 2 columns. Everything on the right are the things that they're either going to develop and test to change, or they will be collecting data, and they only get to collect data once. They can collect as much as they want in one PDSA, but we're not going to fill out a lot of documentation.
So the goal will be stated as increase or decrease.
Increase,
And
decrease,
maintain. It won't say
maintain.
by how much, because we don't know.
Right.
I mean, if we could answer that question, then as Dr. Deming would say, you should have done this last year.
Right.
The reason you didn't is you were goofing off,
And when we teach this, we actually use a simulation, and we give them a charter, and they do an activity, and they actually improve something, and they see that if I'd given them a goal, they would have stopped. And they were able to go to a means that they never could have thought that they could have done.
So when we meet with them for 2 days, you see the PDSA cycles on the right? Those are different PDSA cycles. So when they walk out of there, every team has usually 3 to 5 designed. So they have a path forward. And when Jane said we have a time frame, we're usually shooting for 8 to 12 weeks here for them to develop, test, and implement changes here and get results. So it's a very fast situation.
The other thing that we have on here that's a little bit different that you may not have seen before, and in a PDSA, we ask them to always start the PDSA objective with either, well, actually test, because all of these are about testing. And we don't implement without testing. The other part is you'll see is they all have a thing that we call learning questions. And I heard those comments as well. We need to understand why we're gathering the data and why are we making this change. And if we don't think that change is going to impact our outcome or our process goals, then we shouldn't be doing it. And we should be understanding why we think it's going to be doing that and what the issues are. So we make a prediction first in the plan, and we learn from it. This translates directly, then they take that and they actually move it into their PDSAs, and they can order it in any way they want. This is a critical part of what we do, and we get with the people every week. Now, if you have something due a month from now, when are you going to do the work? A month from now. If you have to meet with Jane and Cliff every week, and you have to meet before you get there because you got to tell them you've done something, you're going to at least do something every week. If you don't, you better have a good excuse. So that's one reason. There's a psychology part of it. But you'll see in this that right here is the key part that was off of the charter. This comes, the PDSAs in progress and complete. That's a summary what comes off of their PDSAs. Barriers are for the sponsor. They want to know what's going on, so now they don't have to go to the meeting. They get this weekly. Lessons learned come right off of the study from the PDSA, and next steps and recommendations come out of their act of their PDSA. And their measures obviously come out of their PDSAs too. So you can see as they've done multiple PDSAs, this was actually to reduce the radiation when they were doing CT scans. Every time they make a change, they don't have a new chart. They actually you get to see the reference all the way through. This keeps the sponsor out of the team meeting. It allows them to delegate and feel good about them, and they have to prove with evidence that they've made improvements, and then they implement. They are charged and given the authority to implement with data evidence. So we find that teams that we work with this, about 80% of the teams can complete in 100 days.
So everybody's familiar with the idea of production viewed as a system. We're calling this organization viewed as a system. API came in here. We've taken a little bit of liberty here, and we've talked about the purpose of the organization. That's item number 1 here. And then really seeing the organization as a system is item number 2. And being able to learn externally as well as internally, getting market research, as Dr. Deming used to admonish us to do, measuring, getting feedback on the system is critical. And then being able to put together a plan to improve. So we're actually making improvements on purpose becomes real important. For our clients, when we actually see the business plan incorporate improvement, that's a key milestone. So when people see those two things come together, that's real critical. And as Dr. Peter Drucker said, you know, when you see these programs, you got to be careful because all of them, regardless of the acronym, they usually degenerate into work. So you see this design and redesign down here. The design and redesign of the system here is critical. Now I've got 5 things up here, and when we were challenged coming out of the Deming seminar, you know, by what method? Dr. Deming kept saying, by what method? He said, now I've given you the theory, but it's your job to go develop the method. So as API sat around the table, they said, well, where are we going to get the methods here for leaders to go do this? And we went back to Dr. Deming's organization viewed as a system, and watch these 5 numbers now. So here's the purpose. Here's the systems view. 2A is the measures of that system, the vital signs of that system. This is the system to obtain information from outside the organization, particularly with an emphasis on the customer. The planning process is the same as it's been since Alexander went into Egypt. You know, so you'll have ends, ways, and ends, means, and ways. I think in the federal government's also designed the same way. The executive branch designs the ends, and then we have a Ways and Means Committee that assigns resources and so forth. And so for us, the ends are the strategic objectives, the ways to get there, the improvement efforts, and then the resources have to be allocated not only to operate the business to improve, but also to improve. And then it's going to be, at this point, it's going to degenerate into work, and then we're going to have that one-page accelerated charter that Jane just showed, and that might be about 20 projects taken off in the organization in order to actually improve this system. The other thing that's kind of essential that we've learned, as this comes from Dr. Maccabee, when we first ran into him, I was doing a little update on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and he pretty well destroyed that in his book called Why Work? And when I first went to work for Lloyd Provost, he told me, we were talking about all this. He said, what do you know about psychology? I said, a little bit. This Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing's real important. He said, but this guy, Maccabee, has destroyed that. I said, really? He handed me the book, Why Work? And so for 20 years, I knew Dr. Maccabee as Dr. Maccabee. And so I was doing some research on the internet, and I saw his address and all that, and I thought, oh my goodness, he's still alive. So I'm going to call him up and see what he's been doing lately. And he answers the phone, and he says, this is Dr. Maccabee. I thought I was going to have a brain lock. There's like 20 years of Maccabee. Now I've got to learn how to say Maccabee here for the next 10 minutes. Bottom line is he invited Jane and I to a workshop, and we went to this workshop, and he had the Army and the CIA in this workshop. He walked me outside into the aisle, and he said, Cliff, we're going to go back in there in a few minutes. I'm going to ask this group to explain their leadership philosophy, and they're not going to know. I said, come on, Dr. Maccabee. I said, you've got the Army and the CIA, and they're certainly be able to answer that. He said, no. He said, when we give them the structure, they'll be able to do it then, but they really haven't reflected on it. And he said, this is going to cause them to reflect on their leadership philosophy. So he walked in and he asked them to explain their purpose as a leader and how that matches the purpose of the organization. He asked them what level of ethical and moral reasoning that they'd like to work at. And today we had one speaker that showed us the book and talked about, if you'll look in that book, there's a reference to Kohlberg. And Kohlberg at Harvard, he said there's 3 levels of ethical and moral reasoning that we kind of advance through as we develop. And the first level is I'm going to take care of me. How many people have teenagers? You know what that looks like, right? Okay, me. The second thing is I'm going to take care of me and mine, me and my organization, me and my family, me and whatever here. Okay, I'm going to take care of that. And the third level is I'm going to worry about the larger system. So Maccabee asked him, at what level as a leader are you going to operate here? And when I first heard that, I thought, well, really, what good is this? But then all of a sudden you start hearing language. And the language tells you immediately where they're operating. And so we were working in the NHS in England, and they needed some room in the ED and the rest of it there. And they said, we could put patients in the maternity if we could get dads to come and pick up the moms. Immediately the head nurse jumped up and said, I can't do that. That's not in my budget. I can't call cabs and stuff. Now, at first I thought, well, that's just a little bit of budget here. That shouldn't be a big deal. In fact, the ED nurse said, we'll pay for it. But she was right, because somebody's going to come back to her a month from now and say, you know what? You took a hit for the system, but now we're going to blame you because
You're over
that's
budget.
not in your budget, So what she's doing is reasonable. So we're forcing her into a level 2 rather than worried about the overall patients and the overall system. So I think once you see those 3 levels and you start listening to the language around you, you can start, even though people are doing this, oh yes, we care about the patients, oh yes, we care about the students, but when you start hearing the language, it's what Dr. Russell Akoff told us one time. He said, you go to a university, and he said, you might be under the illusion that they're there to educate students, but once you actually look at the behaviors and understand the structure, they're there to make life easy on the faculty. So I think that's important. The third one is, what are the practical values? And these are the things that we're willing to shut the place down over. So if I'm not going to use this particular value, then we're going to have a problem here. So for the Marine Corps, for example, they have one that we will never leave our dead or wounded on the battlefield. They get real serious about that. There'd be a real problem here if we took that one off the table. That's a practical value for that group. And then the last one there is, how do we actually define results? And so I see the first one there and that last one is really bookends. And I was working with the Cherokee Nation, and we'd spent about 2 hours defining the role of the healthcare system there. And a lady by the name of Melissa Gower was running that particular group. And she said, Cliff, I'm really glad we got this role. Is there anything you could do to help us with measures? And I said, well, I heard you're working with people on measures. She said, yeah, we had a guy in here for 3 years. We've got 630 measures now. But, as a leadership team, we don't need that many. She said, have you got some method by which you could sort through the 630? And I said, well, that purpose we just wrote? She said, yeah. I said, if you give me a nurse and a doctor at lunch, we might be able to fix it for you by lunch, And she looked at me, she said, well, Jonathan, he's a nurse, take him and take John Kruger and go fix this. And so we sat down, and on the left-hand side, you'll see the statement off of the purpose. If the purpose is any good, it should be able to do what? Yield some good measures on the right-hand side here. So now we got 22 measures down here instead of 630. But what I really see this, and it's real important to grab this, is that whole idea of the purpose and the results are really the bookends of that philosophy. So very important thing that Maccabee taught us here. API has been doing this for a long time. For those of you who have been around us, like Eric Budd and the folks at Dick and my buddy up here have all used these ideas, so these aren't foreign to them at all, and we've been doing this for a long time. But that purpose statement, we ought to be able to take that very quickly and say, by what measure are we accomplishing that? And it's a good check on the purpose. Are we just selling ourselves tickets here and feel-good words, or do these words really mean something? So if I get over there and I don't have the right measure, then I can go back to it.
So as we were writing this book with Dr. Maccabee, we brought up QBS, and we said, QBS is how we integrate quality into the business. And he looked at that, and he said, well, gee, that really looks more like a learning organization. I've heard people talk about learning organization before, but I've never seen anybody give us any methods to get there. And it caused us to stand back and say, well, you're absolutely right. Quality as a business strategy is hard to describe, but really trying to build and lead a learning organization is a lot easier, and that's really what Deming was talking about all along, learning. So you will see the same pieces except a slightly different anchor in the middle. And the anchor in the middle is the purpose, the people, the practical values, the processes, and the products and services. Because as we'll talk about strategic intelligence, we'll be using those 5 Ps to help us develop what we want to look like in the future in our vision. And having the leadership philosophy there and saying that we want to be working in the 3rd level of ethical and moral reasoning and the purpose and the practical values, and we have our results that we want. It ties it all together very well with profound knowledge, because we need to make sure the system, the people, the measurement results and the learning is there, and that's why that is in the heart of it. So as we look at this, one of the key parts of this that we use when we work with clients is the organization viewed as a system. And I've had people ask me, about how, what you do, and we actually have a thing we call, in the old days we called it a linkage, and we now call it a system map or a system linkage. But a map helps you understand that a map can be of the world, of the state, and of the locality, so it has different levels. But this is an actual one of a payer system for a company, and you're going to see, I want to show you different parts of it, but let me tell you how it shakes out, and then I'll tell you a story how it actually happened to me. When I was at ConAgra, Cliff came in and he was working, and he told us we needed to do a system map and we need to have all our processes out. So we had a piece of paper that was an 8.5 by 11 with all the processes. And it was like, how are you going to make this make sense? And then the CEO and the vice president and the president said, I want you to go to this meeting, Jane, because you're over the quality improvement here, and I want you to take this big bunch of processes and make sense of it so that our next meeting when Cliff comes in, that it'll make sense and we can use it. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Just as I was walking in, I get this call from API. Jane, we've been talking about it, and we have grouped processes into 3 categories. The first category are those processes that directly impact the customer. We call that the mainstay. Just like on a ship that has sails, it's what keeps us going forward. And you'll notice on an organizational chart, you never have the customer there. On this, the customer is there. So the next part are those things that drive or influence how we design and run the system. Those are the driver systems right up here. They actually come out from the feedback and the research and development, strategic planning, and the marketing plan, and all the other plans that drive how we go in here and design and run this and this part of the system. The bottom part of the system is called the support. Those things that we have to run the business. In the old days, when I was a cat, they used to call them the non-value-added processes. Right? You've heard that, right? And then the consultants would come in and say, you can cut costs here, get rid of those non-value-added things. They'd leave, and a month later, you better put them back in or we'd shut it down because we're not paying our taxes. You got to pay people, all sorts of things that are necessary, IT, all those things.
So you can see here, if you change the plan or you change the budget, do any of those kind of things, that's going to change what we do in here with customers and how we support this system.
Exactly. Now what you're also going to see on this, let me erase that, is that you see these little round things. What do you think they are? I know you can't see it from a distance, but they kind of look, what do you think they might be? PDSA? Yeah, this is this actual company. The little blue areas, those are their strategic plan, and they map their strategic plan to those processes that needed to be either run better with more resources or improved. Mapped it directly to that. Now you can kind of see. Now you can see also processes on there that are kind of a brown color. In reality, they were red. Those are processes that they don't have, that they need.
So we did a test right now. If you had 8 leaders in a leadership team, and instead of having that definition up there, it looked like this. How many views of that system are we going to have in the room?
Right here.
At least 8. And if I give them a chance to talk to each other, they'll create a 9th. You know, it's amazing stuff to watch. So there was a CEO when we were working in Sweden, a fellow by the name of Sven-Olof. He told us, he said, Cliff, you know, we're getting a lot of pushback from other CEOs in the other parts of Sweden. He said, I don't know why they're fighting you guys so hard. He said, you know, being a CEO and using this, if you're going to be a CEO and lead a system, wouldn't it be a good idea to be able to see it? I said, you would think, Sven-Olof. I mean, that's kind of where I am. So.
And the beauty of being able to see it, if I'm a team, and this actually happened, if I'm a team that's working here, I match the people with the knowledge of that process to the team. What a shock. You got to know what you're going to fundamentally change in those people, right? What if they uncover something that's happening over down in here? Critical things that are happening as they were looking at their stuff. That happens all the time. What happens to teams all the time? They run down the rat holes, right? No. They are actually able to say, give that to the sponsor because this is not, they can write a charter, but they can also say that it's a limitation. They don't have to take all the responsibilities of all the things they uncover. So as we look at this, you can see where people reside. In the company that I ran in the distribution company, our company was small enough that we actually had people's names on it. And anybody could talk to anybody. It was truly a flat company. I had just big boxes that I managed and a few other. There was no middle management.
I was sharing this with somebody today. They said, you know, we have a guy that always wants to make everybody accountable. I said, yeah, it's always kind of funny. I said, right before we do this exercise, you'll get at least one in the group. Oh, we don't need all this. We just need to make people accountable. I said, okay, great. So we get to this point, and we start putting their names on the boxes. This guy was the first one to jump out. Hey, that's not me. Hey, that's not me. I said, whoa, wait a minute. What's going on here? You wanted everybody to be accountable. I mean, do you own this or not? What do you mean by own? Then we'd give him the definition of own. I put his name on there. You could just see the tears running down his eyes. I thought, oh, you want to make somebody else accountable. That's a good thing. But now I'm going to be accountable. Okay.
So how many of you had mobility and management in your career? Raise your hand. Oh, not so many. Wow. I can't believe it.
It's a Deming workshop.
Oh, they're lucky. Well, mobility and management happened to me in my third year at the distribution company, where we had made some huge transformations in the company and grown it from 6 million to 35 million and didn't have any more people. change systems, but we focused on the system and profound knowledge. But I got a new CEO. He says, you know, that guy that works for you, that operations director, you need to get rid of him. He's just doing your job. He says, you need to tell me what he does. So I went back and I started identifying those processes by marking it on the system map we had. Pretty soon I took it, the next day I took it in and I said, here's what he does, here's what I do. Do you see any overlap? He says, oh, no, I don't. I said, good. I guess he's not leaving right. I guess not. Okay. Then he came back and he said, you don't have any job descriptions. Ooh, what are job descriptions? I've been in that. I've been in corporate America. They're very narrowing, aren't they? And how many times have you heard, that's not my job? Well, he gave it to he was going to give it to a consultant, and I said, no, I'll do it. So I developed a role description. The role description is designed much differently because I wanted to maintain the improvement that we were doing and the ideas that we were using that was running our organization very, very well with a few people. One is the organizational, in the actual job description, call it a job description. At the top it has the organization's purpose. The next statement is a roles statement, how it supports the purpose. So for my warehouse guy, they directly support the purpose by pick, packing, and shipping, which were part of my mainstay. We could map the processes from the system map to the roles. Then the process is owned or run, the process and the measures of those processes, which were put on control charts and plotted on a regular basis, not monthly, but for the individual on a daily basis. And then the conduct. I see this missing many times on a lot of job descriptions and have had people and clients tell me, well, this person misbehaved. They're not doing our values. I said, do you have anything that tells them they're supposed to be modeling the values of the organization? Oh. Conduct, modeling behaviors consistent with the practical values. The next part is responsibility for improvement. For themselves and taking responsibility because they are adults, treat them like that.
I just got to say, I've watched Jane use this in several organizations, and what it literally becomes is a passport. Because this person, once they say, hey, I'm responsible for actually working with marketing, they don't have to seek out permission to go do that. We've already defined what those interdependencies are in the system, and now they have permission to go do whatever they can rapidly to take care of the customer. That's what we want to have.
And they have a map. I even had the directions on the back that said, now, if this is something that deals with the customer, it will be in the middle section. If this is something that deals with support like you want to report, it'll be in the bottom section. It has to do with us people that are causing all sorts of problems for you, it's up in the top. So they could find us all the time. And the last part is the qualifications. But, under the responsibility for improvement, we defined that they had to look at things to improve or make suggestions and be part of improvement.
So everything we've talked about up to this point, a lot of structure. Work as a process, really trying to understand that. What is my work as a process? But then how does my process fit in with all the other work processes in the organization viewed as a system? What are the measures that I'm responsible for? What are the measures for the entire system? Now all of a sudden a role description that ties me personally and my role to the overall organization. All that is about structure. And what we've learned that's the most important thing about change, we've learned from safety engineers. And they'll say, well, you can go in and you can worry about the culture all day long. But Margaret Mead told us it's almost impossible to understand that. You can observe two natives going off into the bushes together, and you can imply that all kinds of marital rights are going on in there and all the rest of it, but we really don't know for sure. So most of us can't change cultures. I sat down with consultants on planes, and I'll say, what do you do? And they'll say, well, I change cultures. I said, well, can I come and watch? I'd like to be able to see that trick, And then we got another whole group of people that always likes to worry about everybody's attitude. What that usually translates to is everybody should have my attitude, So that's interesting. I got all day to worry about that. But what we've learned from safety engineers, if you'll go ahead and give me the structure and the method, I can bring that to bear on behaviors right now. And if that is in line, if this structure and method is in line with these practical values, I get a pass-through. For example, chemical industries in Houston, if I walk in there and I say, this change we're getting ready to make is going to help improve plant safety, I can't get a room big enough to have people in that want to support that change. All you have to do is say plant safety, and they're on board. And I think in every organization there's hot words like that, as we start communicating to people why a change is necessary. If we do a good job of that and we help people understand how that's in line with the basic purpose and values, it's real easy to get this thing working. But I don't worry about people's attitudes. I don't worry about changing the culture. What I do worry about is what structure and method do I have to put in place, and Jane says this all the time, to help people do the right thing and make it hard for them to do the wrong thing. And so when we're finished making a change, I'm always asking myself that question. If they say, oh, we've written a policy, oh no, that's probably the weakest thing we can do. Or we retrained them, oh my goodness. You know, what's physically going to be in the work environment here that's really going to help them? As we work with Maccabee, he took us to another step. And for those of you who have attended the 4-day Deming seminars, when Dr. Maccabee would talk about psychology, usually the whole conversation came down to reward systems. You know, he really hated the fact that people were being robbed of joy of work because of ranking and reward systems. What we didn't get really...
Deming. You just said Maccabee.
Okay, thank you.
I don't want you to be confused.
Getting old, so doctors are running together. It's like a Marx Brothers movie. Doctor. But, so anyway, Dr. Deming, you know, we never got in really in depth into personality intelligence and a few things like that. So when we went after Maccabee to actually help us here, Maccabee asked me, he said, Cliff, what do you want out of this book we're going to write together? I said, I want an education. I said, I've always learned a lot when I get to write. And if I have somebody that has any brains that gets to read what I'm writing and give me feedback, I usually learn a lot. So that's what I'm looking for here. So Maccabee, he first introduced us to this idea of strategic intelligence for leaders. This was new to us. So we were pretty excited about it. And he said leaders should have foresight. They should be able to put together a vision. And when he said vision, I said, what do you mean by vision? Is that like too much sugar in the coffee and it causes a reaction? He said, no, it's the idealized design from Akoff. I said, ooh, sounds like a method. You know, so what's the purpose today? What do our processes look like today? What do our people look like today? What do our practical values look like today? What do our products and services look like today? Take that same list, say, what's it going to look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Now I can start to look at the idealized design and start putting together a strategic plan to achieve that. Then I got to partner with somebody, and then I got to actually motivate the people to get started on this. The best example I've come up with in terms of foresight, it just fascinates me. Does anybody know who this guy is? Some of the older folks here probably shopped in the store. Have you heard of Sears and Roebuck? Yeah. This is General Robert Woods, and he ran Sears for years. But that was where he started his career. After World War I, he was a quartermaster general in the Army. So he went to work for Montgomery Ward, who was in the mail order business. So if you're going to have a guy that's going to take over for your operations, if he's been a quartermaster in the Army, this is a good match. So being an Army officer trained at West Point, he thinks intelligence is real important. Getting feedback and understanding what's going on in the marketplace is real important. You know, you go to most places, businesses and all the rest of it, it's the story that Dr. Deming says. When he went to Japan, he met with the Bank of Tokyo and a few other people there, and meeting with the Bank of Tokyo people, he said, well, we'd like to do what they're doing here on improvement. And he said, well, do you ever get any customer complaints? And they said, yeah. He said, well, what do you do? And he says, well, we give them a geisha calendar. And he said, well, have you had any data on any of that? He said, no, I can just tell you how many calendars they gave out. So when I was working with Jane at Conagra, the same thing happened. I said, well, do you get complaints here? And they said, yeah. I said, well, you got any data on complaints? No. So what do you do when you get a complaint? Well, we give them a cookbook. So then this whole conversation came racing back to me. I said, well, how many cookbooks have you given out? Yeah, we know that. So then I was able to actually plot out the data from it. But what Robert Woods did is he got the 1920 census. And what he learned from that 1920 census that was gradual and ongoing, and nobody had really put together yet, is that the populations were moving from the farm to where? Cities. Okay? So Robert Woods looked at that and he said, you know, this is going to hurt our mail order business because it's all rural stuff, and we really need to have department stores. And so he started putting together this vision, and then he shared it with the executive team. You know what they did at Montgomery Ward? Fired him. Fired him on the spot because he wasn't going in accordance with what they were doing. So Sears hired him. Sears was losing money on their mail order business, but they switched over to department stores, and Montgomery Ward never recovered, never caught up with Sears. And Robert Woods is the one that did that. So the last part there is the motivating issue, and we're gonna talk about that, aren't we? Go ahead, partnering.
Yeah. Partnering. There's 5 types of partners. So you've got to look at yourself as a partner with your suppliers and with your customers, if you're truly very good at it, and that's what Deming is telling you to do. And when we look at it, we really want to be up in the strategic partnership and the alliance, and those have the operational definitions in it. We have all the references so that if you can get this comes out of our book. In addition, Dr. Deming says that you really had to work on intrinsic motivation and just finding those people that were intrinsically motivated. And Dr. Maccabee told us, in psychology, and that's not really true. You can actually motivate people, but the way you motivate it is, first, you have to give people the reasons for doing whatever you want them to do. The second thing you should do is tell them what their personal responsibilities are. Then you have to say what the relationships, when you have the system map, you can do that. Then you have to recognize the work that they do and reward them and pay them market and the way they should be. So that's what motivation is about.
When we started writing this book with Maccabee, I asked him immediately, I said, well, how do you define leader?
Cliff.
And he said, that's a person who has followers. Whoa.
People who want to follow you, not because they have to, because they want to.
He said, you could be a manager and have no followers. You're just there by authority. But leaders have followers. And he said, this is the way the leader creates followers.
And leaders don't have to be at the top of the place. It can be at all parts of the organization. We know that. Any of us who believe in the Deming, we've seen leaders at all levels.
So the other part of this, and I won't go over it all because we're running out of time, but we have 3 basic kinds of leaders. And when we wrote the book, Dr. Maccabee kept telling me, Cliff, you have to understand we're not writing a book here to create Superwoman or Superman. What we're doing here is we're writing a book that's going to transform the leadership group to a leadership team so they can actually work together. And the first part of that is to understand what role they're playing. Are they strategic leaders? Are they networking leaders? Or are they operational leaders? So, for example, when Southwest Airlines started up, Herb Kelleher and his lawyer buddy had this idea of having those airplanes run between Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio. And they said we could do it with one plane if we could get it turned in 15 minutes. Well, they were lawyers. They didn't know how to do that. But Colleen Bryant, who was the administrative assistant, she said, I think I can turn that plane in 15 minutes. And Colleen Bryant then became the operations person. Later, she became CEO of Southwest Airlines. But it takes those kind of leaders working together to really make a system hum. The other thing he explained to us is that management functions can be delegated. Leadership relationships cannot. I think that's a real important difference.
So what we're going to do is we've been talking about the system, and we're moving to the psychology side. And we use a particular, I know we have a hard stop, I know.
I'm just going to stand right here to remind you.
Yeah. I've been kicking him, see? I've been nice, too. We use a tool that Maccabee has said has real good links into the personality intelligence and Freud and Fromm. It helps you see the types of people and the team that you're looking at. This happens to be a healthcare group, and you see people on the left, heavy on the left, nurturing and analytic, and a few people that are action-oriented that get a natural conflict with them because of personality differences. You also see the strengths, what people value in themselves that's made them successful, which is very different from behavior-based mechanisms, and the overdone strengths, which Maccabee calls are the unproductive behaviors that come from conflict and stress. When we talk about 2 different people with 2 different particular personalities, their story and what they do is going to be different. On the left side, you have something nurturing. On the right side, we have an action-oriented person. Both have non-production behaviors. The non-production on the nurturing side tends to be the ones at the top, in the middle, and those at the bottom are the ones that are the unproductive behaviors that when you're trying to get things done, you may be controlling, labeling, and attacking. In order to get through that, we have learning norms, but I'm not going to talk about that too much. There are 3 stages of conflict, and this is the only tool out there with personality intelligence that helps you with that. And you can unleash it, and you can mediate better, and people can actually mediate themselves by using this tool. We use it with all of our teams and our leadership teams. We were listening to people wanting people with curiosity and asking the questions, but these are the 5 genetic personality traits. Genetic, it's how people are wired. And some people are not wired that way. So we can work on those things if we know that we're weak on it and alter those things by doing different things. But this is how we're basically wired. You want to talk about
Keep going.
this real quick? Okay.
You're doing good.
Good. Step it up a piece. When things take place, look at the bottom, the observable data and experience. If we give people the data, they come up with different conclusions, don't they? The part that goes on in their head takes that long, seconds. And then they take actions based on the beliefs. What we have to do when we're mediating, when people have different experiences, learning to help understand why they feel the way they do, why they want to do what they want to do, and learning what got them there helps you get a better pool of shared meaning for the whole group.
Dr. Chris Argyris calls this the ladder of inference. And I had one author refer to that trip up that. He says it's storytelling. So it's a story we tell ourselves.
Crucial conversation.
Very, very interesting idea.
You want to talk about this one?
Yeah, just real quick.
Make it quick.
This is something that y'all are probably running into. You see this dashboard over here for a hospital? This red, green, yellow stuff? How many people are aware of this? It's like an international disease right now.
It would
when
be
we
a new
start-
disease.
You can see here we've got unplanned returns to the emergency department. That green line going across right here, that's the goal. How long has this been below the goal?
Forever.
About 2 years. When should it be red? Right now. That's 6 points in a row increasing here. But because they've colored it in green, it's like giving a Novocaine shot to the neck for the leadership team. So as we start showing them these charts and hook the chart to the light here, hopefully we can get them in line here. Oh, this is my favorite one, Jane. I'm going to have to take it. Look at this, infection rate per 1,000 patient days. So this is what the poor leadership team gets to see. We've actually had the quality people from the hospital, they'll say, our managers won't understand these control charts. Really?
Insulting.
We have poultry people, 70% of which are illiterate, and they can understand the chart. So we have high hopes for health care. Now look at this chart. This chart is suffering. What kind of variation does that look like?
Common cause.
Yeah, common cause variation. So if anybody's going to get serious about here, this is going to be a real different meeting to take U bar there and reduce that. That's going to require some brains in the room. And the fact is, if it's above 2 here, they paint it. If it's right at 2, they'll paint it yellow, close as why hurt your self-esteem. Because a little higher than that, it'll go red, then it's green, back and forth, all that.
So the last part is the knowledge in building that, using model for improvement. Those are the 6 skills that we should be developing. And the one skill that I don't think is used enough is number 3. Many people will have an idea and they go directly to implementation. I heard David Langford say, you might test it on a small scale first. Yeah, but you better. Okay. I know we're getting 2 minutes. I
We
know.
don't-
We have to be out of the room at 4 o'clock.
We'll do it. We promise. We're almost there.
Well, but we have some instructions about where we have to go, so
Okay, you'll have
your
it.
speed is appreciated.
Good.
I'm speedy. This is the adult learning theory. This is what David Langford was talking about. Lecture, the understanding the material is a test, and the right is where you want to go. So we're looking at the coaching and reviewing. And the Plan, Do, Study, Act really is just a scientific method with the addition of act.
So built into that, if you notice here from Plan to Do, we got something called deductive
sorry.
learning. And then once we get it down here in the real world, then there's induction. So built into PDSA is the whole idea of deductive, inductive learning, which is foundation of theory and knowledge. I'm not going to go through all this, but Lloyd put this together the other day, and he's showing the pictures of the people who influenced Deming. Then he asked a question down here for me. He said, what's coming after that? And so we have some ideas here. So we've added David Chambers, Donald Norman, John Sturman, Everett Rogers, Michael Maccabee, Nate Silver, Daniel Kahneman, who's just won a Nobel Prize for his stuff on theory of knowledge, and George Box. And with that, there's some references. People that we've learned from, Marvin Wiesborg, narcissistic leaders, rather than the pejorative sense of the term. It's the healthy sign here. They both have productive and non-productive issues.
That's it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You did give me a
started
5-minute
short.
late start. You know that, don't you? It gets some.
Thank you. Jane?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to encourage you all by just a brief note from David Langford. And David is somewhere close by, I hope. This is a copy of Cliff and Jane's book, also written with Dr. Maccabee. I want to make sure and return this to Jane. I borrowed it from your desk. You saw a picture of this improvement guide. It is a resource of great information for learning and improvement. And I also want to mention this book. I was reminded that this book on abolishing performance appraisals and what to do instead, co-written by Tom Cohens, who's a sponsor in honor a scholarship in honor of Tom, has brought several people here from the Lansing Community College. So thank you for all of your attention this afternoon. And Cliff and Jane have already escaped. Thank you again very much for the wealth of learning you shared.